Always bet on Hakari.
Jujutsu Kaisen has presented us with countless innate techniques, curse techniques, simple domains, domain expansions, barrier techniques. However, some of these CTs have become overblown and misunderstood by the JJK fandom at large, and as a result some of them have become way too overrated. Maybe they're used by a fan favourite character, and as a result people kind of overestimate how strong the techniques are. Maybe they're just techniques that are talked about as if they're something real special, when they're really not. So this list can be referring to a combination of things. The word overrated can be referring to the fact that it is overrated in verse, like the way characters talk about the technique is kind of overblown, and or overrated by fans who kind of see the technique with these rose-tinted glasses. Same thing as I said before with my underrated curse techniques video. When I say curse technique, I can be referring to innate techniques or curse techniques, and sometimes maybe domain expansions with some cases. You'll understand more once we proceed, and of course this also goes without saying, but this is my opinion, so don't hurt my feelings too much in the comments below. And finally, because people also love to complain about this, spoilers. Duh. Number 5, Noritoshi Kamo's blood manipulation. Okay, before you get your pitchfork, look at who I said I'm discussing. Kamo, not Chozo. Another fight between Yuji and my boy Chozo made blood manipulation look really friggin' cool. And the thing with blood manipulation is that it has some great showings throughout the entirety of the series. However, none of these showings come from our boy Noritoshi Kamo. This Kamo, not that Kamo. They're all from my guy, Chozo. Unbiased, of course. Kamo's use of blood manipulation is the perfect parallel for the blood manipulation used by Chozo. Kamo needs to rely heavily on preparation to effectively use his technique, making use of stuff like blood bags for a good few of his techniques, or he needs to retroactively dip his arrows into blood before a fight so he can control them at a distance. And on top of that, unlike Chozo, Kamo kinda needs his blood in his body. As Chozo is a curse womb death painting, his body is a wee bit different from other characters. He can basically convert his own cursed energy into more blood, so he can kind of spam his blood manipulation and just make more. We see a great example of this when Chozo fights against Naoya and just summons a whole tidal wave to wash Naoya up. And on top of this, just to show how much better Chozo is, just like his brothers Iso and Kechizu, Chozo's blood is poisonous, so he can just create a tidal wave of blood, and if you get a little bit of it on you, you're going to take at least some damage from it. I mean, it was even damaging Uraume of all people, so this poison is pretty strong to say the least. Contrast this with Kamo's blood. Whilst it may be damaging to cursed spirits, or at least so it's said, because when he uses it, it sometimes doesn't feel like spirits take damage from it. He can't use an awful lot of it since he's, you know, human. Yes, he has some cool and clever ways to decrease the risks of stuff like blood loss, like having blood flow outside his body during the Naoya curse fight. There are still way too many risks when using this ability, like the risk of thrombosis, aka a goddamn blood clot, like with flowing red scale, the risk of blood loss from being too trigger happy with convergence. You know, that cool little power I use in the animation in the beginning, which arguably is one of the stronger techniques in a blood manipulator's tool belt. And as I said prior, if a blood technique doesn't have a risk of killing you, it takes prep time, like storing up blood bags and dipping objects in your blood so you can control them at a distance. Despite being one of the 3 great sorcerer families inherited techniques, its best user that we've seen use this technique is a non-human that isn't even a part of one of the great families. Kamo does try to do some cool things against Naoya, but he just ends up getting bodied pretty much. Granted, he does have some reaction and speed feats like being able to block and protect his head with blood, but whilst this technique obviously has some versatility, I feel like Kamo's version is put on too high of a pedestal in verse, being a technique that is one of the great families, apparently being worthy enough to be considered in the same realm of power as the Gojo and Zenin for clan techniques, which is kind of bonkers to me. Overall, cool technique, cool showings, but it's not the most effective, and Chozo is the boyo. Number 4, Toge Inumaki's cursed speech. I feel like everyone feels this kind of way towards it. A really cool concept for a power, but in practice, his cursed speech, just like Kamo's blood manipulation, has a better user. A user that shouldn't really have it. Enter Yuta Akotsu and his ability of Skill Hunter, Bandit's Secret. Is that Gege with another Hunter reference? Wow. It can pretty fairly be argued that the best possible user that we see for cursed speech is Yuta and not Inumaki, despite what he'll tell you in JJK0. We see Yuta improve his proficiency with the technique from JJK0, originally using a conjured megaphone with the snake eyes and fangs on the side of it, made by Rika, but over time we see him in the culling games, now able to have the insignia appear on his mouth as if he inherited the technique just like Inumaki did, and on top of that, when he used it against Yuro, it seemingly didn't even hit her, since she recognised the technique and attempted to block her ears. Wait, hold up Josh, you just said he's a better user of it, and he doesn't even hit the technique with one of his uses of it. The reason I say that Yuta is a better user of cursed speech is due to the fact that cursed speech as a CT has an enormous amount of recoil when using the more powerful words like explode, etc. When using the technique, the user can damage themselves more so than their targets. Just look at this scramble with Hanami for an example. Toge says a couple words and ends up collapsing, whilst Hanami is pretty much still chilling. If Yuta were in that position, and even if he received the same amount of feedback from saying these words, coughing up blood and losing his ability to speak, Yuta can just go RCT his throat, spam explode like it's nobody's business. Toge can only say so much before his throat gives out. Yuta can do the same, but with his ability to use RCT, he could just do it as much as he likes, and as long as he has cursed energy pretty much. Even still, if we look at cursed speech in a vacuum, it is recognised by high-level sorcerers like Yuro and Geto. It's an inherited technique, which means it's pretty valuable. But the best stuff we see Toge do with it is squash Geto's head a little bit, but he was fine afterwards. I mean, he put Miwa to sleep, he made Hanami stay still a little bit, he stopped Todo a bit, but like, the drawbacks of being forced to speak in code your entire life, on top of the potential damage it can do to you, the user, overall, whilst this technique has some utility, it is not a technique that lives up to the hype a lot of characters give it. However, it did make a huge crater when Toge attacked Geto, which is pretty cool and shows some damage potential that we never really see again. But as I say, Yuta nicked it and is a million times better with it. Number 3, Hakari's private pure love train. Okay, first of all, I gotta say one thing. I love Hakari, like most people who've read the manga. However, his innate technique is kind of strange. One thing I would like to harken on specifically is his innate technique when used outside of his domain expansion, right? We've only ever seen him use his innate technique without his domain a single time, as of writing the script anyway, but I doubt we'll ever see any more of that. Private Pure Love Train, as I say, we've only ever seen once without a domain expansion, and that is against Yuji just after Shibuya. He summons 2 sets of trained doors from Private Pure Love Train to try and trap Yuji. Yuji jumps out of the way, then his head gets trapped and he gets pummeled a bit, but that's it. A man can summon a set of doors, and that's all we've seen. On its own, that's pretty fodder. If it went for Hakari being a CQC, like, god most of the time, that can throw poor Shibuya Yuji around like a ragdoll and throw hands with Kashimo, he would have to rely on his technique or rely on his domain expansion even more than he already does. And outside of his domain, his innate technique is barely even a technique. This is because, just like Higuruma, Hikari's innate technique is heavily intrinsic to his domain expansion, and as a result, pretty much both of them use it exclusively when fighting. Not even really using any other sort of CT. Both characters only use their domain to fight, the only outlier being against the aforementioned fight with Yuji. The thing about the outlier is that it had people theorizing what more could there possibly be if there was anything more to the technique. Can he summon more than trained doors? Is this all there is to it? Since these shuttered doors are one of Hikari's domain's visual effects, can he summon the other visual effects outside of his domain? Just so I don't have to explain Hikari's domain at once, since I may want to cover it in the future, because it is kind of long-winded, especially if you don't know anything about modern pachinko machines, I'll just explain what the visual effects are. When Hakari uses domain, which is based on a pachinko machine, before he reaches a stage of jackpot, he needs to attack his opponent with some visual effects. These just being objects that would be used in a pachinko machine based on his domain. Pachinko balls themselves, and these shuttered doors, aka train doors. When his domain first opens against Charles, he attacks with a pachinko ball, then uses the shuttered doors in a similar way he did against Yuji. Since he can use these doors outside of his domain, it would make sense that he can also spawn pachinko balls too, but they wouldn't have the same effects that they do in Hakari's domain, advancing the stage and starting a roll. Personally, what I think this all boils down to is that outside of Hakari's domain expansion, I believe that he can spawn pachinko balls and train doors. However, spawning pachinko balls out of thin air is like my level, so it's kind of pointless, so he doesn't do it, because he wouldn't be in his domain and they wouldn't have any extra effects, so they would just literally be pachinko balls. Well, how is this overrated then? Because people kind of get this misconception that his rough cursed energy is a cursed technique, when it's not. It's just like kind of like a unique trait for Hakari, or that he has some other cursed technique hidden that we don't really know about. but we can only theorize since we haven't seen it. So in conclusion, this entry is just me trying to explain that, hey, Hakari's innate technique outside of his domain is whack, and as far as we know, besides the 2 train doors against Yuji, we don't really know if there's any more to it, and there probably isn't in my opinion. If there's not outside of his domain, Hakari is like a mixed bag to say the least. I mean, on top of that, if you gave his technique to another character, like any other character, they'd get washed, since it's mega RNG based, and Hakari just kind of the Poco Loco from JoJo of JJK. It's all just luck based. It's an innate technique that is borderline useless outside of his domain, and as a result he relies on his domain exclusively to win fights. So yeah, overrated overall because of RNG and domain expansion reliance. Number 2, are we Todo's Boogie Woogie? I feel like I'm just insulting everyone's favourite characters here, to be honest. What do you mean Boogie Woogie's overrated? Well, Boogie Woogie, well, Todo's Boogie Woogie, is a cool and satisfying spectacle to watch and read. However, there are a few problems I have with it. One main issue I have with it is that we never really see Todo fight on his own before. The closest we see is this slight scuffle with Mahito before Yuji snaps back to reality and it becomes a 2v1 like it always does when Todo has a fight in his 2 fights on screen. When I read this scuffle with Mahito, I realised something. Boogie Woogie as a technique is very reliant on outside sources to be at its max potential. Boogie Woogie, for it to be at its best, needs Todo to be surrounded by cursed spirits and or sorcerers and or cursed tools and or objects he can imbue with cursed energy, since the ability itself allows Todo to switch places with anything that has cursed energy, or switch things besides himself if he chooses. He can switch Yuji with Playful Cloud, himself with Yuji, etc., or he may not even switch it at all. If you just have Todo in a 1v1, he's kind of significantly nerfed. Boogie Woogie is an ability that exists to bamboozle and feint Todo's opponents. It doesn't have any damage output on its own like Cursed Speech can. It doesn't buff you like Blood Manipulation can. It merely momentarily confuses the enemy. It's an ability that relies on outside sources, as well as Todo being able to overpower his opponent with raw strength and black flashes. I mean, all of its best showings, pretty much, are from the fight in which he died. Boogie Woogie can let Todo shambles out of places like Trafalgar Law by imbuing objects with cursed energy and switching, but if you were confronted with an opponent that can overpower him, all it takes is for his opponent to get used to Boogie Woogie and overpower him. There is a reason Todo is a grade 1 and not a special grade. Boogie Woogie is too simple of an ability with only so much utility, and not enough output to make him any stronger. It's the perfect ability to allow Todo to fight in conjunction with his brother, but not one that is best suited for 1v1 combat in my opinion. It can allow him to survive for a lot longer, granted, because Boogie Woogie means he can dodge most things if he has the reaction time and the ability to clap. But in a scenario where it's just Todo and an opponent, they can eventually adapt, or as we see his opponent Mahito do, you can just have an attack large enough or that's omnidirectional that makes switching pointless and irrelevant. If Todo is against a strong enough opponent or an opponent with enough range and output, Boogie Woogie is literally useless. Honourable mention, Gojo's Limitless. Okay, since this is just an honourable mention, I'm going to keep it sweet and succinct. The reason the Limitless is overrated is due to the fact that for Gojo to be as powerful as he is, as much as a force of nature that he was, he needed the ability of not just the Limitless, but the 6 eyes. Without the Limitless in conjunction with the 6 eyes, we have no idea how powerful it would be. The way the Limitless is described is that it's, especially when it's in use constantly, is that it is very draining. But the cursed energy efficiency provided with the 6 eyes in conjunction with RCT allows Gojo to be kind of like a self-recharging battery of sauce. So without the 6 eyes, Gojo would gas out like all other sorcerers who can use their curse techniques. As I said, we don't really know the extent of how much the 6 eyes affects the Limitless and its effectiveness without it. However, everyone loves to bring up the fact that he's the first person with both the Limitless and the 6 eyes in around 400 years. So the fact that he has both is somewhat of a big deal. Number 1. Megumi's 10 Shadows technique. Right, yet again, let me explain this because this one's a biggie. Okay, Megumi's 10 Shadows is overrated for one big reason. He cannot even use all of it or the strongest part of it. The 10 Shadows as a technique is the perfect ability for making the strongest stronger. First, let me explain what the ability actually is. A user of the 10 Shadows can summon 10 different Shikigami to aid them. However, when this ability first manifests, they are only given the ability to summon divine dogs. There are 9 more Shikigami the user can summon. However, the user must perform a ritual and exercise the Shikigami before they will aid the user and follow their orders. Also, if someone else helps with this exorcism, the ritual is void. You cannot have someone else exercise it for you. I mean, if that were possible, Gojo would have just asked for Maharaga to be summoned and would have soloed it, but no. You've got to solo the Shikigami yourself. So that seems fair enough. However, with Divine Dog in conjunction with Megumi, you managed to tame the majority of Shikigami, Nue, Orochi, etc. But this is a big but. The strongest Shikigami provided by the 10 Shadows technique is of course the 8-handed sword divergent Sila Divine General Maharaga, which for obvious reasons the fanbase just calls Maharaga. Now Maharaga is a breed above all the other Shikigami and most of the characters in the entire JJK verse. Well, then how is it overrated? If Chief Maharaga's that strong, why is he overrated? Well, for Megumi, he's overrated due to the fact that if it weren't for Sukuna, Megumi would have died along with Haruta. Then Maharaga would have disappeared as his summoner would be dead. Maharaga as an ability for Megumi is just a guaranteed suicide bomb. And since he can't exercise it, he loses out on Maharaga's strongest ability, adaptation. Maharaga is the doomsday of JJK, okay? Any technique, any domain, anything you hit Maharaga with, he can eventually adapt to. The more you hit him with it, the faster he adapts. Megumi knows probably not that much about this. All Maharaga is to him is a button for mutually assured destruction. When he's about to die, he uses Maharaga as one final FU before he loses. Because when he summons Maharaga, it starts the exercising ritual, which causes it to go haywire and attack everything around him. And since the ritual is started, if Megumi dies during this ritual, he'll be put in a state of suspended death. I mean, we see this. Megumi pretty much dies here, but the ritual stays active till everyone who's around when Maharaga was summoned is dead, or Maharaga is dead. So Haruta kind of saves Megumi here accidentally, since he's around Megumi, keeping him in a suspended death. He is then saved by Sukuna, who recognises how busted this ability is, and just like Yuta and Cursed Speech, steals it and performs way better than Megumi ever could have and or ever will. Hence what I said at the start, it makes the strongest stronger. If you are strong enough to kill Maharaga, which no other 10 Shadows user has apparently ever been able to do, you have just gotten the strongest summon of the 10 Shadows that can solo 99% of the verse. But as I say, Megumi, to him, it's just a guaranteed kill that kills him. Sukuna uses it to beat Yorozu, right? And she's no joke. And it helped him defeat Gojo, of all people. The way I see it, Sukuna's 10 Shadows is different to Megumi's 10 Shadows, okay? When I see a different user, I see it as a different technique. Granted, they're in the same body, but that's a different argument, okay? Sukuna with the 10 Shadows, pretty much unstoppable. Megumi with the 10 Shadows struggled against his Haruta surprise attack. Granted, it was after a good few fights, but still. Megumi will never be able to unlock the full potential of his ability, but Sukuna can and did. Granted, if Megumi gets Sukuna out of his body somehow, he'd probably have access to Maharaga, but obviously not due to him being strong enough himself to defeat Maharaga. I'm saying Megumi's use of Maharaga is overrated, not Sukuna's. Sukuna's use of Maharaga is fairly rated in my opinion. Just look at the difference in the Nue the two summoned, if you want a clear distinction between these two users. People treat the 10 Shadows as best curse technique since Sukuna saw it and his eyes widened. So he stole it. However, he saw the potential of the ability, less so how amazing Megumi was with it, despite the weird language Sukuna uses to describe Megumi with. What I'm saying is, Megumi's best feats with the 10 Shadows are like against Reggie-Star. Also on another note, this is just kind of like a tangent, does Sukuna have access to Megumi's domain? Like, since a domain is imbuing a curse technique with a barrier, since he has the curse technique, can he use his domain? I don't know. Well, let me know what you think below. Anyway, did you spot a pattern? Most of the overrated techniques on this list are the versions of techniques that are better used by people who pretty much shouldn't have them. Jojo's better than Kamo, Yuto's better than Inumaki, Sukuna's better than Megumi, and the other places on this list are techniques that require specific scenarios to have their max potential, like Todo needing cursed energy imbued things around him, Gojo needing the six eyes, or Hakari just needing to use his domain and need a jackpot for his innate technique to be like,
well, that's too damn bad.
Good. Not gonna lie, I don't feel like I explained my points the best in this video regarding how I view curse techniques from the same body having different users, like Kenjaku and the original body owner having different curse techniques technically, but that's, as I say, a completely different argument. But I already made the animation and I needed the vid out before Christmas, so feel free to slate me in the comments below. If this video does well, I'll make another goofy JJK video that annoys people and shows how stupid my opinions on the series are. If you want me to talk about a specific topic, let me know below. And with that being said, did you like the animations I made? I've made a couple more of these for these videos. Anyway, with that being said, toodles my doodles, hopefully see you in the next one. Peace.
Well, that's too damn bad.